Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Joyce Harris, and I'll be the moderator for today's Ask the Expert webinar. I can't make friends by myself. How to improve social interaction for teens with ADHD. Today's webinar is brought to you by CHADD's National Resource Center on ADHD. Our mission is to improve the lives of people affected by ADHD. If you are unable to address your question, please feel free to contact Chad, and one of our health information specialists will provide you with information and resources.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, everyone. I know that this has been a particularly interesting time throughout the world in terms of all of us struggling with social connection. So I'm hoping tonight to give you a little bit of information and a lot of confidence in your ability to help your child of any age. But particularly, I think that tweens and teenagers are struggling a lot right now. And so I just want to start by saying when I talk about social skills tonight and anytime I speak about it, I'm talking about those skills you need to manage relationships. I always think ahead to the workplace, right? We're preparing our children to go out into the world and to have skills for their lifespan. And when I think about social skills, I think about studies that have been done that have addressed what CEOs, what company presidents, what companies want. And one thing that they say is that they want people who can manage conflict and work cooperatively. So when I'm thinking of communication skills and friendship is also just a launch pad for our young people being able to self-advocate, work with others, and engage with a group. Um, Friendship is obviously incredibly important. We're all experiencing just how much that social connection means to us. But one of the things that comes up a lot when I work with kids is that they will tell me that they have a relationship with someone when in fact they actually have more of what is an acquaintance. And when I think about friendship and relationships, I think about someone who unprompted, right, um, has, the ability to see you, wants to see you, reaches out to you. There's reciprocity, right? Interesting fact, I know that we're in this world where a lot of us are operating virtually now, but, studies have found that in the 1970s, kids had about 7 friendships. And studies today still continue to say that kids have about 7 friendships. So, there are kids who are shy or introverted or struggle, and they might have a few friends and it might be a deeper relationship. But what we really want for our kids are those communication skills, right? Because they translate to our larger life. And that's really part of what friendship is. Enter COVID into this dynamic of teenagers and tweens with ADHD. In teenage life, as you know, peer group is everything. It is the most important thing. And one thing you may be experiencing with your teenager is that when kids have a very thin social network, the current situation where we have often a virtual relationship or we have some social distancing and we have a lot of dynamics, if you're going back to school or college full time, there are limitations, there are rules. People are more in pods and smaller groups, observing social distancing. And so what happens is for kids with ADHD who have a very thin social network, maybe of acquaintances, you might be encouraging your child to reach out, but they may be worried that there won't be that reciprocity. And so I know often parents tell me that they've given good advice and that things are resisted. And, this is partly because kids who don't have great social skills or who don't have a wide social network or who don't feel like it's easy for them to reach out, sometimes they're going to stick with friends who don't treat them well. Sometimes they're going to stick with, people they already know. or they maybe become incredibly defensive. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is how do you reach a point with your teen where you can talk about these things collaboratively, where you're not entering a shouting match, and where they can actually start to also move forward in learning these skills. And that's really part of what I want to talk about tonight is, how do we help these young people in this very difficult situation? Because a lot of lunch and after school social opportunities have been taken away, as well as, some of the ways that they might find common interest. Now, there are other ways though. And so I don't want us to lose heart. There are definitely emerging social networks and social opportunities, but we have to be sympathetic to kids. They are in a tough situation this fall. So, it may not feel like an epic ask to you. Many parents say to me that they put, reaching out to friends on their kids' schedule, or they say to them, I want you to text 2 people a day. And I think we all have such good intentions there. But consider the steps involved, especially if your child has some anxiety, especially if they feel that this would make them very vulnerable. And remember, teenagers, just by their development, it's totally natural for them to feel they are the only one, right? They are the only one struggling with this. And so as you're trying to have sort of a conversation about this, or try to make reaching out and seeing people part of their daily life, you're probably going to meet from some kids some resistance. The other thing too is that there's a lot of shame involved. But you as a parent may be noticing that, we've been in this social distance for 6 months, and that your child doesn't have people reaching out. So one of the things I would say to you is that this method and the way to reach them, it is probably small conversations, and it is a marathon, not a sprint. So you're going to help to become more of their collaborative partner over time. It's not going to necessarily happen tomorrow, but this is really, something that can happen, and it really is beneficial for them, especially if they're struggling. What's in it for me? So one of the things about teenagers is that they don't always know what is best for them. I love to bring teens into the conversation and, have sort of that carrot, right? And talk about, especially if they want a certain career. There are definitely things in my book, Why Will No One Play With Me, about how you need certain skills for certain careers. And with many teenagers, I help them to see that, what they want to do, whatever it is, that there is a social element, and to empower them. But that doesn't always work with some kids. And so one of the things that I always talk about with teens is what's in it for me. So looking at tying daily actions and tying this collaboration to what they're interested in. And sometimes that is, the ability to graduate from some supports, or the ability to have more privileges. With teens, it's really about privileges, right? And to not tell them, but to work more collaboratively, which we're going to talk about in a second. I want to talk just for a minute about the process to become friends, because I think as we ask our teens to reach out, and as we're working with them, we really want to think about the fact that it is a process, right? Friendship is action. It's not something that is passive. And many of you are probably frustrated because you know this, and you're working with a teenager who will say, people will reach out to me, people will come to me. And that's really the story that they're telling themselves, or it's based in fear. But if we think about the process to make friends, or to make any relationships, this could be networking too. We have to meet someone. We think about how they, relate to us, how they're similar or different. We engage in small talk. And again, this is a skill that is not easy for many kids with ADHD. And we're going to talk about how to build these skills. You try to learn about the other person. Well, some kids with ADHD don't have a great sense of perspective taking, right? And so it doesn't come intuitively to them, or they talk too much, or they share too much. So again, that's a skill that needs to be built. You share information about yourself, right? But not to exhaust the person, to share some information. And then you try to share common experiences. And this is harder in COVID, but it is not impossible, right? And so one of the things that I would suggest is, as you get this more collaborative relationship, and we're going to talk about that communication style to use to try to get your teenager to work more collaborative with you, there are emerging opportunities. There are online classes. There are groups forming. Many schools are now sort of, pivoting and realizing that, we need to offer clubs and other things, even if the school is 100% virtual. I just was talking to a huge school system in the Midwest today where they are going to be offering a lot of clubs and opportunities. And then there's other parts of the country and of the world where, people are practicing social distancing, but they're allowing for more of these in-person clubs and things. But that's a common experience. And one of the things that really helps a lot of teenagers, especially if they are struggling, is to have a place where they can go where they share those common experiences, and therefore they are in proximity to or with other kids. And we see these potential friends, and then the idea is to bridge toward seeing them outside of that activity or outside of that club, and then to see them more often. This is the part that's very, very hard for our ADHD teenagers. And one reason I want you to become more of a collaborative partner with them and to communicate with them in a way that allows you to help and coach them is that many times, if you were to show this slide of all the steps involved with becoming a friend, the teenagers that I work with would really struggle with parts of this. And what I would say is that's where you can coach and help them, and then help build the skills necessary. And I'm going to give you some things from Why Will No One Play With Me tonight, but I would also say to you, a lot of the skill building I provide. Connection is action. So if we want to become closer to someone, we need to schedule and join in, as you know. One of the tips that I have is to have a specific role. So if a teenager is really struggling, those kind of communication skills don't come easily to them, it's really hard for them to bridge. One of the things I really suggest is that if you have a role, right? If you are, on the school newspaper and you need to talk to people, that allows them to reach out and to partner with other kids and to create that shared experience. And yes, I know there are kids who won't join anything, and I'm completely aware of that. And I am, I'm that's another talk that I could give, but I definitely think also the collaborative style that I'm going to talk about in a second, it really helps. One of the things that I suggest working on is small talk. I have a series of exercises called Build on That. That's in Why Will No One Play With Me. But one of the things I love to do is to equip kids with some bridging questions and some practice, right? So we talk about different topics and we role play and we look at, what can they say when they start with hi, hello, and then how do you bridge into a larger conversation? Well, it's like anything, you're building on that conversation, right? And so one of the things I've found is that kids will filter because they're so nervous or they're so anxious about what to say, or they're feeling like, they have to say the perfect thing. And so part of what we're going to talk about tonight is this coaching style, so that you can sort of find out and be a little bit of a detective and come to understand, why is it easy for them to bridge and make conversations in with you and maybe not in person. So I love to give kids some bridging questions, something that they can ask, what was that like? How is your day going? I saw you at, soccer. How did it go? And sort of have those in their back pocket for when they get nervous. The style that I keep talking about that helps you have a more collaborative conversation with your child uses two things, which is open questions and reflective listening. And open questions are really one of the cornerstones of this. If you think about when anybody tells you something, you kind of shut down. Whereas if I ask you, what goes on for you? Or what is that like? Or, what kind of person are you looking for? Or, what are your interests? Then you have more of an opportunity to think about and contemplate. And another beautiful thing happens. When you answer a question, you kind of rise above your body and you hear yourself. So if your child has a lot of stories about, why they aren't social or why it's not necessary, in a non-aggressive way to explore those stories so that you're asking like, I hear you saying that. What makes you say that? And that way they're going to have a short conversation with you and really start to hear themselves. My analogy is sometimes, you've been at a party and you're defending a position and then you realize halfway through, like, I don't even believe that anymore. And what we want to do is also, instead of telling them, every day you're going to reach out, I want you to text two people, which makes them shut down, is to, ask them, what would you be comfortable with? And, what do you think goes into being a friend? What kind of steps do you think you need to take? And to shift more to that communication so that they're less defensive. The other big advice I have on this is make it a short conversation and knock before you enter kind of thing. So if their room is sort of their domain and you find you don't have as good of conversations there, I talk a lot in the book about paving, and you're trying to pave the way toward this more collaborative relationship. And so I suggest that, you knock before you enter, you give them a little space, and you also have short conversations rather than more of an interrogation. Also, I would start doing fun things with your kid. Do things with them that they enjoy, so that when you have, relationships and you're trying to talk and coach them through this social stuff, it's not the only thing you talk about. And that, because that gets old, right? If the only time I ever talk to you is to talk about things like this, it gets very hard and they don't love it. The other tip that I have is called reflective listening. And this is a really easy one, and you can use it very effectively with your boss, your mother-in-law. It really works. This is to repeat back your child's statement. You're not giving an opinion, you're just encapsulating what they said. You can use their exact words, or if you can't remember, just the gist of what they said. They use this technique literally with prisoners. And the reason they use it is that it clarifies your thoughts. It validates you on some level to feel heard. You're confirming information, right? What you're saying is that everybody else doesn't see anybody outside of school too, right? And then what happens is they probably will clarify some things with you because they're going to hear you and sort of realize how the statement sounds. If nothing else, they feel heard. You clarify information and you're able to sort of just neutralize things. It's a very neutralizing technique. So by using these techniques, you have a much greater shot at having your child be willing to talk about social stuff, which can be kind of the elephant in the room. I really suggest this technique too for anything you're encountering with them around homeschool, homework, schooling, because it gets their perspective. And one of the things we forget to do with teenagers the most often is to get their perspective and make them a partner and problem solve with them. Because they have a perspective, they have thoughts, and many times they can come up with the best solutions. But we have to have that more collaborative relationship. Um, One of the teenagers that I'm working with now had a bit of wisdom. She said, saying that I'm cranky makes me cranky. We all do this. I'm completely guilty of this as a parent, where at times you say to your friend or your girlfriend or your, the grandmother, oh, so and so is so cranky. Oh, they're so, hard to work with right now. Or we make jokes within the family about so and so is cranky. what happens then is that we really are sort of triggering the kid and they're going to have a big emotional reaction. So the more we can shift our communication style and remember that part of their, job developmentally is to break away from us a bit. And frankly, I think they're in a really hard position with COVID and everything going on. I think that anything we can do to not comment on things will make them more receptive to our information. I often suggest to parents that you partner with your child and literally ask them, what are the 5 words they never want to hear from you again? And sometimes it hurts a little bit, but if you think about it, if you want to have this collaborative relationship with your child and be able to talk to them about social and help them build these skills, and every time they walk through the door, you're engaging with them about homework or some hot topic, it's much harder to have that partnership. I'm not saying you don't engage with them about certain things, but the way we engage really makes a difference. The other suggestion I have is to talk about friendship and relationships, not to talk about their particular lagging skills, right? So one of the things we can do is to just talk about relationships and friendships. So instead of saying, I don't like the way these people treat you, or I don't think these are the right friends, or pushing certain friendships, one of the things we can do is talk about friendship and relationships and how enjoyable are they. Ask your child about what they enjoy about a person, even if the person drives you crazy. What do they like about them? We want our children to think about relationships and their reciprocity, and the fact that someone, in order to be in a relationship, someone has to reach back out to you, that there's reciprocity. But where friendship and all of this is so shameful for so many kids with ADHD, and especially right now, they're probably acutely aware when they don't have as much going on, and they don't have as many friends going on. We want to give them the opportunity to talk about relationships and friendships and not sort of make them self-conscious about their skills. And so one of the things to start doing is to talk about communication skills, for instance, and talk about whatever career, whatever thing they're interested in. They don't have to end up doing it, right? But if they want to be a YouTube star or they want to be a gamer, there are social skills involved. There are also skills involved in terms of organization, time management. So if we talk in that broader way and we engage with them and we try to hear about what interests them, we have such a greater shot of then helping and influencing them around friendship. So I don't ever talk about friendship and sort of, what you're missing. What I talk about is relationships and what you want, and, what it is that you're interested in and who might be a good fit for that interest. And then we often come across the opposition of, I don't want to join anything. Now you're going to use your new collaborative style of communication to try to help them over time to have those conversations about, what they could join and what they'd be comfortable with. I should mention too that some kids are doing incredibly well with this virtual joining, and it's easier for them. In that case, what we're going to work on, and I have many articles coming out about this, is bridging from that virtual world back into the in-person world. But if they're willing to do that, then that's great. I love it. Let's get them, working on those skills in the virtual world, and then we can translate them back. One of the things research shows that I think you'll find true is that translation back can happen, especially if they develop a relationship outside whatever virtual, world they're in. So if they start texting and calling and, actually having interface with someone, then they actually end up bridging to the real world. So if your child only has virtual relationships and you're worried about it, the key is going to be for them to start that bridging process. And I think the communication style that we've talked about tonight is really one of the ways to pave the way and help them and coach them through. And I talked about there's many skills that they're going to need. I have a video that's free that you can download, and here's the link. And this is something that is right from While No Play With Me, and it's called Good Winner, Good Loser. And I teach you in the video how to play games with your child and teach them how to be a good winner or a good loser, because some kids have emotional regulation issues and they either are, throwing the game board, or they are really struggling with their emotions. And so again, it's a great model to help you learn how to do that skill building. And my goal is always to provide you with a playbook. I think one of the hardest things as a parent about the current situation, I know for me, has been that I didn't have a playbook for, teaching my kid math or any of the things we've been asked to do. And so my goal here is to provide you with that playbook, because I think you are your child's original teacher and you have so much to offer to them. And the more we equip you with that playbook, the better you'll be. And I really do think that the collaborative style can also help you in the sense that teenagers are going through a lot. They've lost a lot. And we want to give them some validation and sympathy for the fact that this is hard.
Okay, Caroline, we have one question
Okay.
asking about reciprocity, and the participant asks, what do we do when there is no reciprocity?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the first thing I'd want to do is diagnose a little bit about why do we think there's no reciprocity, right? So is it that the person meets friends and then, we with ADHD kind of sometimes exhaust people? Is it that they don't reach out and they don't engage with other folks? Like, we have to start with a little diagnosis of what's going on in the situation. And then I think one of the biggest things is, to help the teen have more confidence and to help them become more of a partner with you, to coach them to build whatever skill it is, right? If they are telling too much information and sort of exhausting people, then we want to help them to have, more perspective taking, walk in people's shoes, and sort of, be able to self-regulate more. And if they're really not reaching out, we want to help them to look at how would it be to reach out and to practice that skill. And by the way, sometimes joining something, in a different town or someplace where they have a fresh start with those new skills can be a real way to practice and have confidence and have a little anonymity.
Wonderful, thank you. Another participant asks, I'm concerned about my child's friends. They are very limited. I'm glad that he has a couple of friends, but I would want to know what could help him branch out to new friends. So it looks like she's asking for advice on her child making more friends or new friends.
Yeah, that is a very common thing that we face. And I think one of the things I would say is that, I had a girl I was working with, and when she went to a new school, we were very worried because, she didn't make friends easily. And she actually came up with like the tip of the century. She wore a t-shirt that showed something she was interested in, and then people were, talking about it and commenting. So my first thing is, friendship is really based on us having common interests with folks. So for, a kid who has, what I call a thin social network, like not that many friends, and wants to make more, and we want them to branch out, and have that ability. It's just to talk to them about what it is that interests them. What are the places where they really feel comfortable and people they enjoy, right? And then to help and guide them so that they join more stuff, to meet more people. Then if they're in proximity and with people and they're not bridging toward friendship, now we can work on that skill, right? How do you ask people? How do you text them? How do you see them outside the group? But one of the things that's really common in this situation is that, you know, especially after sort of fifth grade, kids control their own socialization. So the more stuff you're involved with, the more that is something you're interested in, the more you're going to meet people of like interest, and you're able to form that connection that's so key to friendship. So my big thing is, to find your people, right? Who are your people and who's interested in the things you're interested in?
Perfect, thank you. Another participant asked, how do you teach kids who don't pick up on social cues, verbal or nonverbal?
So, one of my favorite things to do is to help kids learn how to read the room, which is really to read those verbal and nonverbal social cues. In sort of pre-COVID times, I have a bunch of lessons that all involve, shopping trips and going to malls and people watching. But you can still do this in this current environment. And one of the greatest foils that I've found for this is actually your family. So one of the things I do with kids, and this is in the book, is I break it down, and we just start by looking at different facial expressions and then sort of making it a game within the family. And I love to do things that are everybody in the family is working on something, right? And we're all supporting each other. And if there are siblings, we need to get on board to get them on board. We're not teasing. Where the kid is starting, in the current times where you may be social distancing, to read facial expressions and social cues in the house like they might if they were following my lessons and going to malls and going to food courts. You can also have them watch videos. Pinterest is literally a palooza. If you literally just type social skills videos, or you watch things like Big Bang, The Office, to look at those and have them actually interpret the emotions and facial expressions of the characters, right? And to learn to step into their shoes. And it's a longer process that when I'm describing, which is why I have written a book. But the really big thing is that we have to help them to pause and look at the body language and then sort of create a repertoire, right? So that when you're talking to them and interacting with them, even to say to them, let's say you're angry at them, right? To say to them, read my body language. What do you think I'm thinking right now? And to cue them and to say, my arms are folded. What does that mean? So you're actually teaching them in the moment as you parent them. And you have to get permission and sort of get them on board with this, which is why we talked a lot about communication.
Thank you. Okay, I have a good question coming for you. You ready?
All right.
Okay, this one's about integration. I love this question. So, a participant says that her daughter, she's a freshman in college, and she feels that there are already so many groups, I'm
Yeah.
assuming on campus. And so she needs some support in how to teach her daughter how to integrate herself. So, what tips can she give her to make herself be a part of the groups that are already on campus?
Oh, I love that. If you think about integration, it's really all about joining something and participating, right? And so some of it goes back to that reading the room, right? So you have to be able to read the unspoken rules and sort of the social norms of the group. Every group, every country, every little niche has their own unspoken rules, their social norms. And so what I want this girl to do is first read those social norms, but I want her to join things, right? Because the more she joins and actually participates. So for some kids, I literally have to define for them participation, where you're going to raise your hand at least twice, you're going to speak up at least twice a meeting. I mean, it sounds a little silly, but if I just say participate, they'll tell me they participated but they didn't actually speak. So I know this is hard for some kids. I'm not saying this isn't going to take some support and some, hugs and love. But I think one of the biggest things is that if you go and you're kind of a ghost and you don't participate, then you're not part of the group. I had a young woman I worked with a couple of years ago where we were helping her because in her high school yearbook, basically nobody had anything deep to say because they didn't know her, and she was just fabulous, but she wasn't integrated into her community. And so what we did was we made this goal of, when she graduates from college, people are going to know her. And so she joined a bunch of things, and then we worked on her confidence and actually speaking out. And again, going back to one of the slides I had, she took a role. So she became, the manager of one of these activities so that she had an excuse to talk to people, so that she had meetings with them, and so that she had an excuse to be with them in smaller groups. Now you're part of whatever on-campus society. Now you're integrating yourself more. And again, I know this, I'm sort of oversimplifying because there's a lot of self-confidence and a lot of, jitters that go into this. But if somebody takes those action steps, we can work through the jitters as long as we're actually, in that place, in that space, if you will, with other people.
Okay, thank you. I think your first response to the reciprocity question spurred more questions. So I'm going to condense maybe about 3 or 4 into one main question for you. So the first, part A, part B. Part A is if the child is the one experiencing the lack of reciprocity, do you think or do you believe that the parent should ask the other child's parent if he or she does not want to interact? Is that a good strategy to use? And then part B to that is a bad friend better than no friend? And by bad friend, mom means one who is happy to take from the relationship but not necessarily give. And she used the example of for not inviting the child over. So can you tackle A and B same time?
Yes, ma'am. I think um, with the first part, I would say that if it was a very, very good friend and you wanted to sort of get to the bottom of why is my kid alienating other people, or why are they left out, or why aren't they getting that reciprocity, and it's someone that you can sort of secretly talk to without them sharing this with the wider community or in any way shaming your kid, then yes. But calling someone you don't know very intimately is probably not a good idea, because it kind of lowers your child's social status and makes them stick out a little bit. I would suggest, instead of that, reaching out to school counselors, teachers, coaches on the QT and saying to them, I want to figure out how I can help my child and why they're not getting that reciprocity. And I'd like you to be honest with me. And I actually have scripts for this and why no one play with me, because then you're getting someone to say to you, listen, he does make friends and then he alienates them. Or listen, she sits and she doesn't talk to anybody, and that's the issue. What we always want to do is to get information and diagnose a little bit, but we don't want to shame. You arranging social and helping depends on the age of the child as well. Younger kids, yes, you can help introduce them to people, but you also have to remember that if they don't have the skills, then we need to build those skills. When they're older, we're kind of out of the social game, unfortunately, and we're encouraging the background, and sometimes we're helping a kid write the text, and no one knows, but we aren't necessarily able to organize the social. And then the bad friend question, I think that what I would want to do is bridge toward better friends. Most kids that I've ever seen, hundreds of kids that I've worked with, will not get rid of that bad friend because they feel that that's all they have. And so what I want to do is give them the skills which is key here, right? Because you need those skills. But then I want to give them more opportunities that we talked about tonight for more friends, because being treated badly is not only is it not real friendship, but it's not something that's going to build the child's confidence, right? Now they're going to feel like this is all I deserve, this is all I get. And I don't want them to go into life with that message. But I'm just saying my experience is they won't give up that bad friend until they make more friends. And I do think another path is that how enjoyable is the friendship piece, where you're talking to them about relationships and how it is that they want to be treated and how they're treated. That will help you when it's time for them to say, well, now I've made other friends and I don't want just this bad friend. And I've, by the way, seen it happen hundreds of times where when the child makes other friends or teen, right, they then start to say, well, wait a minute, this person doesn't treat me as well. So we want to not directly tell them, because then they're going to shut down and maybe even cling to the bad friend just sort of because they're, in adversarial relationship with you. But it is a really big dilemma, and I see it all the time, and it breaks my heart because a lot of times kids aren't being treated well.
Okay, Caroline, I have a few questions, but let's say we're going to place it under anything I need to know. So I'm going to give you three main scenarios that I see, and then you'll respond with anything that these parents or professionals need to know in this climate. So the first is I have an introvert 15-year-old son. Anything I need to know, or any extra things I need to know. The
Okay.
second is a participant who works with clients who have ADHD, but they also have DX of autism, which of course makes developing friends more difficult. So, any suggestions, particularly if they're concrete? So, again, anything I need to know. And then, last, a mom is concerned that her male teen is watching too much video content all day, but doesn't see the need to socialize. So anything she needs to know in terms of communicating why socializing is even necessary. So in those three contexts, can you speak to anything those professionals or parents need to know?
Sure. So with introverts, one of the things that I always say as an extrovert, and a lot of times we as extroverts are raising introverts as a little haha, is that, what we want to look at is what that introvert needs socially and what skills they need to function in the world. And by function, I mean live up to their potential, right? So they may not get energy from being social, and they may have two or three really deep friends, and they may not need a ton of friends. But what I want them to be able to produce is the ability to communicate their needs, to self advocate. What are they going to need in the workplace, and to make sure they have those skills and abilities, even if sometimes they're out of their comfort zone. So we don't want an introvert to become an extrovert. What we want is for them to be able, though, to be their best self. And they that's my biggest thing to know. The second is that I work with a lot of kids who are ADHD and on the spectrum, and I would say that when kids are concrete, what we want is to open up their perspective taking, right? To the idea that not everybody has the same perspective and is that concrete, right? So I have a lot of lessons about stepping into other people's shoes and sort of the rule police, so that, I can always tell a kid who's had help versus a kid who hasn't, who's on the spectrum, because the kid who has had help, even, ADHD and spectrum, will say to me, I know that, I feel X and other people don't feel the same way. So it's really this understanding of the social world and understanding that other people have different mindsets that we want to help them with, so that, they can understand and step into someone else's shoes. And in this case, the direct instruction and skill building is absolutely essential, and super rewarding. The last is that I think many, many, many people and parents are facing this video dilemma. I think that's where your collaborative style is really necessary, because it is not good for our brains to be on video all day long. And we've been told for years and years it's not even good for us to be on Zoom all day long. And so we want to set some limits and help with the self-regulation piece, but not in an autocratic way, because that won't work out. So that's where your collaborative communication is going to help for the problem solving. I get it. He doesn't think social is necessary, but it's not about forcing social in this instance. It's about looking at him doing other things and him having more balance and, sleep and nutrition and all that kind of good stuff. And then, exploring, I'd say, using the open questions, what makes him say being social isn't necessary, and looking back at pre-COVID, what is it that he did or didn't do socially, and helping to look at in his plan, his longer term plan of, what does he plan to do, and, how is he going to sort of make that happen. And I would also suggest that you may want to talk to a licensed professional, like a therapist, if you think there's any depression, because there's a chance sometimes kids can't engage socially, because they're experiencing that.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I have a question here that's directly related to when the child is the one being socially hurtful. So the participant says, what do you do with a child who is stubborn and can be hurtful socially? And by hurtful, he or she means that the child is ignorant of the social and emotional cues and says mean things in response because those cues are not there.
Right. I think that's such an important distinction. Many parents come to me and they are really upset because they have, these wonderful ways of being themselves, and they don't want to have a kid who is insensitive or who they would say is being hurtful. And I think that's a big distinction, right? We know kids who can be socially hurtful or bully are often miserable themselves and have their own emotional needs unmet. But I think with the ADHD kids, there's such a difference. Many of the kids that I work with alienate other kids, and they don't mean to, and they just don't read cues, and they don't understand and step into someone else's shoes, and they're just a little too much. And they also have, remember, we know that brain development for ADHD kids can be 3 to 5 years behind with maturity. So often I also find that they think the joke is funny, or their their sense of what is funny and stuff is immature, and therefore what they're doing alienates people or is hurtful, but they really don't get it. They don't know. So in this instance, I really want to open them up to the rules of the social world, stepping into other people's shoes. And a simple way to start this is just when they say something hurtful to you, is to say, what you just said hurt me, or to say, is this what you mean? Or to say, let's read my body language. What do you think I'm feeling right now? One of the things that I find is that if you help this child solve this in the family and start to take perspective, step into someone else's shoes, I would do those lessons from Why Will No One Play With Me with them if you can. You can even do them with, you using just words with them. And you then, if you can solve it within the family, what I find is it then translates to the real world, because what you're doing is you're shifting someone's mindset to understand what's alienating. I also, in a very delicate way, have had siblings also participate, especially if they're mature and you feel that they can do so in a way that it, isn't going to cause, strife, where they'll start to say to the kid, I don't like the way you're treating me, or let's pause. Do you get that I said no 35 times? And that really helps because it's not just you saying these things. So it is a very common problem, and I think that it's completely something that you can overcome. But we have to help the kid understand and take perspective of other people and look at his own behavior. And the first step for that is really you helping him to read the cues and reflecting on things as they happen to you. And it takes time. And I'm going to warn you, there's going to be moments where you're going to think, oh my God, he doesn't get it. But over time, he will.
Caroline, on the heels of that, can you also address, it's very similar, can you also address when a child is just silly but doesn't understand that while the jokes may be funny to him or even another group, they're not funny to some people? How do you help a child make that distinction?
Yes, I've experienced this a lot. I've even had kids who make jokes that, get them in trouble at school. And again, this goes back to the maturity issue with ADHD and sort of the self-regulation going too far. So I have a couple things. One is that, again, we look at, how is everyone else reacting to this joke, and what, are they still laughing? This is sort of a pausing issue, right? Is to help them to pause and realize that everybody isn't still laughing. The other is to give them, I love it if they can make some friends who are maybe a little more mature, be with people who are a little more mature, because then they're going to have models who are more mature. Not always possible, but if you have older siblings, anyone who can help you with this, it's fabulous. Cousins. And then the other thing is that just asking them, what is it that is so funny, and how does that person feel? And again, that stepping into people's shoes, because most of the kids I've ever worked with have the biggest hearts ever, but they will say things that they think are funny, and they actually alienate people and sometimes even get you in trouble in school. Telling them to stop doesn't do anything because they don't really get what they're doing alienates people. They have to sort of start to understand, what's funny and what isn't.
Perfect. Do you have specific tips that you would say are different for grandparents who are raising their grandchildren in terms of the social skills we're talking about tonight?
Well, I love grandparents raising their grandchildren because I have to tell you, I've worked with them a lot. And one of the things that grandparents do that I wish everyone would do, and I'm hoping that because if we're going to experience this COVID thing, let's take the good from it, which is to eat dinner as a family and practice these social communications at dinner. So I find that, my parents, we always ate dinner together. And like tonight, I'm crazed. I'm not even eating dinner. And so it's really important to try to get in those dinners. And grandparents raising children, I would say, go back to some of those traditions and use them because they are part of how we learn social skills, is having conversation. You're building on conversation, talking about topics, learning from each other. So I would say for those folks, you have a model that really worked that we don't follow as much anymore. And for those who are listening who aren't grandparents, what I always try to do is to fit in, let's make sure we have dinner, 4 out of 7 nights, whatever we can, so that we do practice those social skills as a family.
Perfect. This is a very specific question. I want to ask it though, because I believe you may have tips to help this mom empower her daughter in real time, or her granddaughter, excuse me, in real time. So she says, My granddaughter wants to invite a friend to go to the mall for her birthday. She's assuming they'll just walk around and possibly shop. She's a ninth grader and she goes to school with this friend. What does the grandparent do if the friend does not show up? She wants to specifically have strategies if her granddaughter has a meltdown, like real time in the mall.
Well, I certainly sincerely hope she doesn't, because that would be horrible on her birthday. But I think the thing is, probably the grandparent has some inkling about this friend, maybe, of why she might not show up. Would it be possible for the girl to invite a second person so that someone shows up on her birthday? Um, if it were normal times, and I don't know where this person is in the country or the world, they can, I would carpool the person so we make sure that they show up because it's a birthday. We want everybody to be happy. But I think if she does not show up and there is a meltdown, the one of the biggest things she can do in anticipation of this is to have her granddaughter practice strategies every day towards self-regulation, like breathing in and out, like having a song she says or a mantra over and over in her head. Something she does at school if she's melting down, to sort of down regulate and bring her emotions back down. I always explain to kids this concept of your emotions flooding you and how you leave your thinking brain. And maybe they can have a code word. Sometimes, kids will get, I don't want to talk about it right now, but if you have a code word of reminding them of their strategies, then, if she was in the mall and she had to sort of give her a hug and say, strategies or pause or breathe or whatever the word is, then she can help her granddaughter who's not in thinking brain kind of regain that level set and use those strategies. But I can't tell you enough. I really, write me. I want to know how this turns out because I really hope everything that isn't even an issue.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take two more questions outside of this one. But this question is, in your experience, Caroline, what is the role of taking ADHD medication in making successful friendships?
Well, I would say, obviously, I'm not a doctor, so I can't advise people to take ADHD medications or not. But what I would say is that medication helps you with self-regulation and self-awareness in many cases, and with emotional regulation. And so, whatever someone needs to do in order to help that along, as long as they are consulting with a physician, it can be extremely beneficial. So I have some kids who, run 5 miles or whatever. And then I do think that whenever you can get help with that self-regulation, it's going to be beneficial and it's going to have a positive effect.
Okay, wonderful. I have another mom who's asking about specific suggestions. Her son is 15 on small ways to start the process of making friends, specifically because he will not engage or begin that initiation step. So, do you have any tips for that?
So I have 2 or 3 thoughts. One is spend time with him having fun. 2, invite people to participate in that fun. Maybe cousins, friends of the family, someone who he could be with. Third is to actually talk to him about this. Like, it's you don't want to necessarily reach out. So what can we do to help you reach out? And if maybe sometimes one of the things I get kids to do is if they won't reach out, they won't text someone or something. But if I can get them to agree to join an activity, then they will make friends. And with teenagers, sometimes we have to make it. You want these privileges. I would love for you to join this activity. What can we do to work together? Because the activity is going to benefit them and they're going to meet people. And if you have to, allow them an hour of video game time, that will still be hugely beneficial. So that's one of my pieces of advice is, when we're in the cajoling mode, is to sort of have this partnership.
Okay, great. And the last question of the night, I want to ask you, I'm going to call it EQs, Caroline, because I have a few questions about, okay, my child doesn't necessarily struggle with social cues in person or when they have the visualization of the person, but in terms of making friends online, how can they best do that when they can't rely on the social cues when they can see the person? So are there
Yeah.
any EQs that you can assist with?
Yes, I do. And this is a problem as well as in masks, right? In masks, you can't always see what people are thinking and feeling. I was somewhere the other day and I wanted to say to people, I'm smiling at you, right? But you can't see it. So I think that one of the things I would say is that, part of what goes into reading cues is sort of context and sort of the vibe you get from a group. So if they can, join, a Google Hangout or join something that people are doing and they can listen and be a good listener, then they don't even have to see the person's face, right? I grew up in a time where we didn't use Zoom, we used the phone, right? And I couldn't see people's face, but I can listen to what they say and read between the lines. So that's another way. And then the other thing is to really do kind of, a thought and a sketch of who are these people and what do I know about them? And so how do I, what do I know about their hot buttons? What do I know about their interests? What do I know about their background? And then, okay, based on that, how might they react to my statement or the way I'm being or my joke or whatever? Because, we if we pause, it feels a little awkward, but if you're in a group, no one's going to notice and you actually know things about people and you can sort of take a guess of how will they react.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us this evening and for providing our participants with this very helpful information on social interactions for teens with ADHD.